Hello, and welcome back to Tangled Twists. I'm Lissa, and today we're going to be talking about making an 18th century petticoat. As we continue on with my historically adequate witch, it's time to start making the layers that we can see. I've already made the under layers for this outfit. It's the petticoat, the chemise, and the stays, plus a rump. Now I need to make the petticoat, which is an over petticoat or a skirt. It depends on how many layers you put over it, and the pattern that I'm using for the bodice does actually have a skirt pattern with it, but it's basically the same skirt pattern that I've used to make my multitude of 18th century skirts. I've made a ton of them. I like them a lot. They're very comfortable. They're very easy. But to switch things up a little bit, because I've made so many, I decided that I was going to give a go to the American Duchess book again and use a few more historical techniques, especially for fitting this time. And it did turn out quite well. So let's get started and I will take you on the journey of my purple petticoat. As usual, we're getting started by preparing the fabric. I'm going to be measuring out the fabric length that I need, making a little snip, and then we're back to thread pulling. I do thread pulling an awful lot, but I don't actually enjoy doing it. It tends to be a major pain because linen has lots of little bumps in the threads that it's woven with. Those bumps are called slubs, and they like to get caught in the other threads. That means they tend to break, so you're going to see me grab that little pin and pin it back to my shirt a couple of times. That is my picking pin. Every time one of these threads breaks, I use that little pin to help me get the broken end of the thread back out so that I can continue pulling on it and continue working the thread out through the piece. If it's such a pain, why do I keep doing it? Well, there's a couple reasons. Perfectly straight lines, you'll hear me say that a lot, and you'll notice I'm sitting on the couch. I'm not crawling around on the floor, I'm not killing my knees, I am comfortably ensconced in my sewing nest, pulling away on all of those little threads, and I can actually cut the fabric from here. I don't have to move, I don't have to try to have a nice big surface to work on. I can do everything from the comfort of my couch. So once I get those last few threads pulled, and happy smile there because I got a nice big chunk out instead of itty bitty pieces, now I'm going to start setting up my cutting system. I use a neck light for this because if you put a light behind the fabric, it makes it really easy to see where you pulled that thread out. If you look closely on the video, you can actually see that brighter line when it's illuminated from underneath by that light. And like I said, sitting on the couch, watching TV, I'm not an audiobooker, just minding my own business, having a nice day, slicing fabric from the comfort of my sewing nest, which is good because these are long pieces and it can take quite a while to get all of them fully cut out. Once I have my panel pieces cut out, I can start attaching them. This is a 2-panel skirt. They'll be connected at the sides and there'll be a 10-inch gap at the top to give me some pocket slits. I need to pin together one side, which is different from how I would normally do this. I would usually make both pieces and then stitch them together. For this, it wants me to connect the panels, but only on one side before I go and pleat. So I'm going to sit and hand stitch that, double check my seam allowance and my stitch length before I really get going and give that seam a nice good stitch. It doesn't need to be finished because those selvage edges are going to keep it nice and clean. It doesn't need any extra help from me for that. With my panels cut and stitched down one side, it's time to pleat. I have my favorite centering ruler out so that I can make my center 6-inch box pleat and then knife pleat out from there. I am using my usual method of pin the top and pin a little bit down for each of the pleats. That helps keep the top edge of the fabric from moving around and getting curved and misshapen. It's a really handy method. I highly recommend it. Again, like with the under petticoat, there is no set formula for this. It is just kind of fake it till you make it, see what looks good. I had to redo this because the first time that I tried to put these pleats in, I picked wrong and my pleats weren't the right size. But once I hit on a system that worked, by using my centering ruler and the grid marks on my cutting mat, I was able to remember how big I needed to make everything, and all of the other pleats came out nice and evenly. And the same is going to be true for the second panel. That's where things get a little bit tricky with this, because once you have your first panel done, now you have to move everything around. You've got both panels of fabric connected at this point, so I have to be able to pull that fabric with the weight of the other skirt behind it. This panel is the back panel, and it is getting a reverse box pleat. That is as seen from the exterior. You're looking at the inside right now. And so it's the same process here. Mark out that big center pleat and then pull the fabric into position. It's a little bit different because I'm tucking the fabric under instead of pulling the fabric over. And I have that big piece of fabric that I'm trying to kind of pull along as I pull all of those little pleats in and still keep everything neat, tidy, and cleanly lined up. That was a little bit more tedious than I was expecting it to be, but it does give me the advantage of being able to check those pleats and make sure that they look nice together. Since they're supposed to kind of go all the way around, it's important that those side edge pleats line up in such a way that makes sense for the rest of the garment, so that you don't get pleats that are oddly shaped or oddly spaced along the sides where it might be a little bit more noticeable. I spent a lot of time making sure that those pleats would turn out nice, and I don't want them to fall out. So I am running a basting stitch along the top edge of the fabric. It's about 1/4 inch down from the edge, and this is going to secure my pleats. I'm supposed to leave the pins in for fitting. Don't much care for that. They're hard to stitch around. I keep catching my thread on them as I work, and I just really prefer when you can take the pins out as you go. This is kind of a pain, but it's going to keep my pleats safe. It's going to keep them secure. If a pin comes out at any point, I don't have to worry about the pleats coming out and needing to redo that at all. Everything will be safe and secure, and it will be a lot easier to work with later because I know that those pleats can't get loose on their own. And since all of the pins got left in, that makes this next step really kind of interesting because I've got a spiky little porcupine on my lap now. It's time to sew the second side seam, but in order to do that, I need to mark where the pocket is going to go. It's the 10-inch opening that I have on the other side, and I like to indicate that by using my pins in a different orientation. Anytime I have to do something where I stop part of the way, I try to put my pins parallel to where the seam's going to be, because normally I would have the pins perpendicular or across where the seam line goes. And this way I can tell where I'm supposed to stop. I do this on hand sewing and machine sewing pieces just to have that visual reminder. I like to keep that opening pinned because it helps keep the fabric in the correct orientation. So there are multiple reasons why I do it that way. And once I have everything pinned, I can go ahead and do my 1/2-inch seam allowance back stitch along the edge of that fabric. And I'll know exactly where I want to stop so that I can leave my pocket space open and make sure that that seam does what it's supposed to do. Now that I have my second skirt seam closed, I can turn my attention to the hem. It is possible to hem this and then do that seam, but the resulting hem where you close it will be very bulky and very chunky and won't look very nice. It's definitely better to close up your skirt side seams first and then do the hem. I'm using the 18th century hemming technique of baste, fold, and whip. I have come to love this method since I've started working on this project. It makes just the nicest hems. There's something about that basting stitch holding things in place. If you look at it, I mean, how beautiful is that? I don't even have this turned and whipped yet, and it's just crisp and lovely and just so perfect to work with. You can turn it up and whip that edge just so incredibly easily. It's great. I'm trying my petticoat on over my stays and rump, and I'm starting to wonder if my rump is maybe a little bit more full than it should be. I've got a mirror set up over here so that I can see what I'm doing, and you'll notice that my hem is uneven. That's part of what this step is for. You tie a tape around your waist, and the skirt goes under that, and you use that to adjust the hem. I feel like the skirt in the back is coming up a little higher than I'd like. I'd prefer it to be closer to the length that the front portion of this skirt is, but with the rump, that's just not happening. So I think I'm going to unpick my rump and take some of the stuffing out just to bring this down a little and see if I like the silhouette better. Reducing the size of the rump was absolutely a good call. It didn't get me quite as much length in the back as I would like. That's on me for how I cut this, but it's definitely good enough to be getting on with. So now I need to start the hem adjustment process. Normally on a skirt, you would hang it and you would level the hem at the bottom. This time we're leveling the hem at the top. I've never done this before and it's a little weird. I have my hemming ruler in front of me and I'm looking in the mirror and using that to see where the length of my skirt is near the bottom so that I can adjust exactly how high up I need to pull the waist of the skirt to keep the hem level across the entire garment. This was a surprisingly fiddly process. I did knock over my ruler a couple of times, and it's really hard to do with the pins in. I know they're supposed to be in for fitting purposes, but I think if I do this again, I'm just going to go ahead and baste it because I got stabbed so many times in this process. It really isn't worth it. But I was able to successfully level that hem by myself, and that's really all I needed. And this is where things get weird, because I now need to put the waist tape on. This is the last step for this skirt, where it's usually a couple steps from the end on most other patterns that I've worked on. You whip the tape in place to the top of your seam allowance and then fold it down into the skirt and whip the other edge down. That works just fine for the back portion of the skirt because, again, I didn't adjust the waist there. It's just going to be flat and level. But look how chunky that is. I'm not sure if that's just a feature of the fabric that I'm using, or if I were using a slightly lighter fabric, if it would still be that bulky. I'm not sure that I really like that, and it gets even stranger on the front because I had to adjust the length of my hem. But you don't cut that fabric off. Historically, that would be so that you could continue to use the skirt and maybe let it out or change things as styles changed. You'd have one big square piece of fabric. But what functionally this means is that I have 2 inches of excess that I'm going to be tucking to the inside of my skirt. That's a little odd. I'm not really sure how I feel about that, or if it's a technique that I'm really going to use much in the future. It could just be that I'm not used to it, so it feels strange to do, but I feel like this is almost an unnecessary amount of bulk. And again, maybe that's just something that was me, but you need a waist. And that's my purple petticoat done. I'm really happy with it. It did work out a little bit differently than I was expecting. There are a few things that I hadn't counted on. First, the linen that I'm using is pretty heavy, so the front does feel a little bit bulky the way it's folded over the pleats. I'm probably going to need to give that a really good press to see if I can get that down a little bit. That's also in part due to having to raise the hem on the front portion of the petticoat to accommodate the fullness of the rump in the back. Because of that, I've got about 2 inches that are folded down and under, and that's adding a little bit of extra bulk as well. If I decide I don't like the rump, though, because I haven't cut anything, I can always unpick that portion of waistband and make it match the back, which is something that I really like. I like to be able to wear my skirts, so there is a good chance that maybe this one won't stay with the rump. We'll have to wait and see on that. But that same adjustment also made the pocket slits sit a little bit funny. I'm not sure if that's wholly that adjustment or if the way that the back is pleated is part of that as well. I'll learn more about that as I wear the skirt, I would imagine. But now that the petticoat is done, I can move on to my black cotton jacket. and that's where we're heading next. I'll see you soon.